nutrition and herbs, and I wanted to um, present to you a topic called An Introduction to Wilderness Herbal First Aid. I just taught this workshop last night in Marquette, Michigan, so for those of you who wanted to come and missed it or live far away, here is a recap. So this is a bit unique from the other presentations I give. I have a few slides included on my background and how I got involved in teaching this workshop. So many of you know I am a practitioner, and the modalities that I practice through are primarily nutrition and herbalism. And I also do some freelance writing for a herb school out east called the Herbal Academy, and then I'm also doing some research for the American Botanical Council, which has a national database that kind of conglomerates and summarizes clinical research on botanical herbs. So, and in my 20s, I was actually not taking the path of a practitioner. I was spending a lot of my time working on and managing sustainable farms. So I began by enrolling in MSU's Student Organic Farming Certificate Program. I did a bunch of seasonal work after that in various states, and I ended up being fortunate enough to apprentice with a farmer in Maine, Elliot Coleman. That's his farm in the upper left. And out in Maine, I was also the caretaker for Helen and Scott Nearing's historic homestead. They're in the bottom left, and they were authors of Living the Good Life. So after several years of farming, I ended up getting a job with the Chicago Botanic Gardens, where I managed a sustainable farm and youth development program. And when I was working in Chicago, I developed my own difficult to diagnose health crisis and was seeking help from both conventional doctors and integrative medicine doctors. And in my journey, I found the most help and compassion from an integrative doctor who's a naturopath practitioner. And I think the personal experience of struggling with my own health and navigating that process, as well as spending so much time learning how to grow food and teaching others to do so as well. I wanted to develop a deeper understanding of how food can be utilized as medicine and to help restore the body. And so I think the most natural transition for me was to focus on nutrition as a basic foundation for me and everyone, and then integrating herbs when necessary. So I enrolled in grad school, and I completed the only master's program in the country from an accredited school in therapeutic herbalism. And part of that, there were small nuggets of that experience where we were doing guided plant walks with some really well-known herbalists and ethnobotanists, and also learning a bit about the herb industry. So the lower right, I was visiting Gaia Herbs and learning how they grow herbs from a more of a production model on their land. And then I also was, instead of working on or managing a farm, I was a CSA member of a farm down the road from where I lived in Maryland. And I noticed that a lot of the members just didn't really know how to utilize the herb garden where you could go and pick your own herbs. So I made some herbal products and talked to different CSA members about what herbs I used in the garden and how they can be used for certain ailments. So there was sort of an educational component. But as you can see, I was always wanting to bridge that practitioner training with my agriculture background. Um, so I was interested in that aspect, probably much more than most of my peers. And I did write a paper in grad school where I was conducting a case report on cooperatives as a viable business model where small scale farmers could aggregate orders and compete with larger industries. And that was because the herb industry is just growing a lot in our country. However, 80% of herbs are sourced overseas, and although a lot of that is through reputable supply chains, I think just looking at long-term sustainability, um, I wondered why we didn't see more people growing medicinal herbs um, here in the US. So I was interested in that, and that recently has been published by Moses, which is here in the Midwest, because I wanted to bring that information on how to structure that business model, the successes and challenges to this region of the country. And there's a lot of really wonderful people up in the UP that are doing great work, and I highlighted last night one of those people. Her name's Leanne Hatfield, and she and her husband run Seeds and Spores Family Farm, and their land recently became a botanical sanctuary through United Plant Savers, and she has an herbal CSA as part of their farm, and offers herb walks, and they just received a grant for a certified kitchen so she can do herbal products there, and so that's a great resource, and a friend of mine that I value and trust her skills and knowledge. And here's some books as I started to brainstorm about preparing for this workshop topic. The book that I went to immediately was Sam Kaufman's The Herbal Medic. That's the only book that I'm aware of that's published on specifically wilderness herbal first aid. And then James Green's book is a really helpful book when you're interested in making your own herbal medicine products. Not for market, but more for just self-care. And then I think having a good field guide book, such as the Peterson one, that's the one I tend to use just because my botany background is not super proficient, and so they actually organized that book by the color of flowers instead of the structure of the plant, so it's pretty easy for a novice to use and navigate that. And if you want to strengthen your botany, that lower right corner, that book Botany in a Day, is a great book to get. And here's some just online resources that I utilized for the workshop but are also accessible to whomever. Sam Kaufman has a website called The Human Path, and you can learn about all the different programs and trainings he offers that are geared more towards survival and wilderness and trauma training and living off grid and things like that. And then Herbalists Without Borders is a good resource too. They're mainly volunteer-based organization, but they run programs all over the world, and they helped me with preparing for this workshop too. I haven't taken the Botany Everyday course, but it's a good resource to know of. It's a free botany course that you can take that's offered by Mark Williams, and he's pictured up in that corner, upper right corner there. And I've gone on guided plant walks with him, and he is a wealth of knowledge and a great teacher, and so I think that would be a great foundational course to take if you're interested in learning to identify plants in the wild, and particularly medicinal herbs. And it's free, so I feel like why not do that if you have the time. So I wanted to get this one out of the way because it's not obviously an herb, but it is a great resource to have if you are in the wilderness. Activated charcoal is just burnt wood without oxygen, and you can make it on your own, but I think if you have the ability to and you want to be prepared, it's really best to purchase activated charcoal in bulk from a reputable supplier and just have it in your backpack. It can be used for localized infections, snake bites, and gastrointestinal disorders, and you can use it topically as well as take it internally. It For localized infections, it bonds to dead tissue, bacteria, and toxins and removes them from the surface of a wound so it can begin to heal. And for snake bites, which aren't a major concern up in our region, but for other parts of the country, is this helpful to know about? If you have a large gaping type of wound, you can apply the charcoal directly to the wound and put it in contact with the bite for 30 to 60 minutes. But most snake bites are going to be pretty small wounds that are hard to kind of to address that way. And so what you'd want to do is create a slurry with clean water and charcoal, and submerge that small wound into the slurry for 30 to 60 minutes. And that can kind of disinfect it and help it to heal. You would also want to take the powder internally, because the powder can absorb the fat-soluble remnants of the venom. And you take that 1 to 2 hours away from any herbs and foods, because you don't want the charcoal to absorb those herbs and food as well. It's also great if you happen to get food poisoning while you're traveling or hiking, and it will absorb the toxins from the stomach and digestive tract. You can take a large dose of this too. A 120-pound person can take as much as 54 grams. So you can really use it to clean out any toxins that you may have exposed yourself to. So this gets into the herbs, and how I determined this list was, as I mentioned, I've more so taken a practitioner's path, but because of my background in ag and just appreciation for going on hikes and being outdoors, I have an interest in this area, and I'm happy to teach about it. However, I don't consider myself a strong expert on wilderness herbal first aid, so I had to do a lot of research and prepare for this topic. And as part of that, I contacted Sam Kaufman and asked him, if you were in the wilderness, what would be your top 4 to 5 herbs or products that you would really want to be with, and sort of like the stranded on a desert island scenario. And so this was his top ones. I tried to also focus on ones that were more in our bioregion, but one of them is not. So common barberry was listed, and that's because it's antibacterial, antiviral, and antiprotozoal, and it also has the ability to aid in expelling parasites. So you can tell from those 4 actions I just listed is that this herb has a really strong ability to support the GI. It's very bitter because it's high in berberine, and because it's so bitter, it helps a lot with the GI. It helps stimulate bile flow. It can help stimulate liver function. So it has all these actions towards the GI, the gallbladder, the liver, but it's also astringent, meaning that it can help tone, and it's a mucosal vulnerary, meaning that it can help heal the mucosal lining of the entire GI tract. So tone and heal any damage from the lining. So it's great for most all GI issues. The parts that are used are typically the root and the stem bark, and that's because they have the highest alkaloid content. If you're wondering, the berries are edible. They're high in vitamin C, but they don't taste good. So you can eat them, but whether or not you'd enjoy that, it's debatable. And you'd likely want to carry this in your backpack and have it on hand as a tincture, like a tinctured root would be ideal. And you can use it anytime you get traveler's diarrhea, dysentery, bloating, constipation, giardia, cryptosporidium, and ringworm. Because it can help with modifying the bowel flora and healing the mucous membranes. You could also, if you're hiking and you happen to find this in your area, and you feel confident in your plant ID knowledge, then you could make a tea with the bark, and that can help with a lot of the similar actions, any sort of GI distress. You can use the leaves too, or leaves, for any sort of nausea. So if you had altitude sickness while you were traveling, or hiking, it can help with that. And that could be a tincture or a tea. And I couldn't find a picture of the roots of common barberry, but these are related medicinal plants. And you can see how they have sort of that vibrant yellow color. That's just a good indicator of the high berberine content, and that those are all great for gastrointestinal issues. Okay, so this is the one that I mentioned earlier that is not native to the Upper Peninsula, and that's chaparral. And that grows mostly in the southwest part of the country. I'll explain why this is important herb to know of, even though it's not native to this area, as it relates to survival in the wilderness. So its actions are that it's antiviral, specifically to anything that's herpes related. It's antimicrobial, and it's a depurative, meaning it helps purify and detoxify the body. It's a hepatic alterative, meaning that it cleans the blood in the liver. It's a hemostat, so it has the ability to help with any internal or external bleeding. It can also help with tissue repair and regeneration, both internally and externally. It's toning and anti-inflammatory. One thing to note is that it is toxic in large quantities. So this is one where you're taking a almost homeopathic drop dose of. So if you, and it's contraindicated in anyone who has issues with liver function. So that's important to know of. It's also very high in terpenes. So if you look at that top right picture, it looks kind of sticky and resinous, which it is. So it's got a lot of resin and essential oils, so it's very aromatic. Um, and that's the most active constituent of the herb. So the most applicable use for this herb for wilderness herbal first aid is that if if things go down and you need to survive, it's really a nice herb to have a tincture of if you're exposed to any sort of chemicals or toxic waste, or possibly if you ate the wrong type of mushroom or had a lot of alcohol or even drugs in your system, because it is a hepatic alterative and a depurative, so it can help clean out the blood within the liver and also purify and detoxify the body. And I don't know of another herb that works as effectively in that way. So it's a good one to know about, but it's likely not one that you would take regularly. It would be more to have on hand in case of an emergency situation. It's also effective for burns, minor cuts, wounds, and rashes. So for burns, you can use a tea and make an external wash with it and apply it kind of cool or cold, and it can be used for even sunburns in that way. You can also make a poultice or blend it with other herbs that have complementary actions. And I'll talk about that on the next slide, but you could do a poultice and apply it topically to any kind of burns. That would be in the powdered form of that herb. And then for minor cuts, it's similar to the burns. So let's just go to the next slide and I'll explain that. So I don't think I'm gonna list off what the actions are and indications of each of these herbs are and how they relate to chaparral, because that kind of gets into herbal formulations, which could be a topic all of its own. But you can just know that you can use complementary herbs in powdered form with chaparral, and you could custom blend those. And you could, when you wanted to use it, you would mix it with some sort of solvent. Ideally, if it was for a burn, you would mix it with a raw honey, but water works just fine. And the recommendation is that you place these between two gauze pads on the wounded area, and then wrap that with some sort of bandage or whatever will hold it in place. And then you can keep reapplying that and allowing some time in between to let the wound air out. So that's something to think about. and you can look up those herbs more closely on your own. And if you are in this area and you're just, even after, I've explained the uses of chaparral and you're not really sold on using something that's a non-native, there are other herbs in this area that can help in some of those ways that chaparral does, but I don't know of one that touches on all the same indications as chaparral. So for detoxifying and kind of cleansing the blood, burdock root and dandelion root can both be good for that. They're very bitter, so they have some benefit to the GI and the bile, help with constipation, and have some actions towards bowel flora even. But so those cleanse the blood, and they do have a more toning action to the liver, but they're not quite as potent as chaparral would be, and not quite as focused on cleansing the blood within the liver for optimum detoxification. They'd be gentler. And then comfrey leaf can be used as a salve. So a salve would be, typically a base of beeswax and some form of oil, maybe essential oils added in. But that can help with tissue repair because it's very anti-inflammatory, can heal wounds, it's demulcent, can help with things like ulcers, insect bites, psoriasis, even fractures, sprains, osteoarthritis, and muscle pain to some extent. And then usnea is a symbiotic algae and fungus that grows here, and it's a very strong antimicrobial. So that can help with things like ringworm and athlete's foot. Okay, so the third herb to discuss is prickly ash, and this is the shrub variety or species. It's not the tall tree. The shrub grows more northerly than the tree does, but it just touches some counties of the UP, so it's not a real common one to find, but it is here. And the main importance for prickly ash in terms of wilderness survival is that it's a strong circulatory stimulant, and that makes it's very warming and moving throughout the body, and it's used in herbal formulations for things like Raynaud's. So if you're lost in the wilderness and you're extremely cold or risking frostbite, this is a good herb that you could take as a tincture form or make a strong tea, and it would help warm your extremities from the inside out. So I think that that's a good survival tip to know in terms of this herb, but it's also antibacterial. It can help expel parasites. It's a digestive stimulant. It can help induce sweating, and it can help move things through your lymphatic system, and it also has some analgesic or pain relieving properties. And the bark is the medicinal part that you would use. It's related to the citrus family, which is kind of interesting to think about this far north. And if you could put a bit of the bark in your mouth, you would find sort of that it has a kind of numbing feeling to the mouth, but also very heating, and you may even feel sensations through the extremities of your body, meaning that it's almost kind of sharp, and it makes for a good carrier herb to help transport other herbs throughout the body. And I think that kind of sharpness, it's kind of the herb's way of showing us that it has this ability to deal with pain, and also as an analgesic, but also help with circulation. And it was used traditionally for toothaches because of that numbing feeling. You could just chew on a bit of the bark in the area, or maybe not chew, but you could place it on the area of your tooth that was painful. It is used also for gastrointestinal issues, mostly in tincture form, and that's because of its antibacterial and anti-helminthic properties. for parasites, dysentery, roundworms, cramps, gas, diarrhea, all that good stuff. Musculoskeletal system, you could use it in a salve for chronic pain, any forms of arthritis, lower back pain, injuries such as sprains and strains. At the next slide, I'll recommend some complementary herbs. Oh, not that slide. This is just a picture of what the shrub looks like in the bark to help with recognizing it out in the field. So here's some complementary herbs if you wanted to make your own liniment or salve. A liniment's just an infused oil, whereas a salve is a bit more of a thicker paste of beeswax and an oil and maybe essential oils and other herbs. So you could look at those, and that would be a really great topical remedy for a number of different types of pain and inflammation. So the final one is echinacea, and there's 3 different species of echinacea, and for the first 2 that are pictured there, you would typically use the root, and the last one is you typically use the aerial parts. We know echinacea is good for our immune systems. Most everyone knows that by now. It also has an interesting history as an anti-infective, mostly for being used by the Sioux Indians for snake bites. And I think that some of that history has gotten lost in the marketing of echinacea as an immune stimulant. So the Sioux Indians used it for snake bites, insect bites, and various other poisonings. And then it was later adapted by an eclectic herbalist, Dr. Meyer, and used as part of his Meyer's blood purifier formula, which was one of the original snake oil, containing also Artemisia and Humulus lupulus, which is just hops. So it's been used a lot for snake bites historically. So that's good to know about in the wilderness again, that it has that. And there's not a lot of contraindications unless you have an allergy to the Asteraceae family or you're taking an immunosuppressive drug. The Pallida and Purpurea species do grow in the UP, where the Angustifolia is the one that has the deeper rooted history by the Sioux Indians being used in the Great Plains area. You can take it as a use it as a poultice or a tincture, and you typically are blending various species together so that there's sort of a synergy there. And they can be used, the tincture can be used for a number of viral or bacterial infections that you may be fighting off of. It's best used at the onset of an infection. And then both of those, the tincture and poultice, can be used for wounds, and then toxins from poisonous insect bites. And you could, even if you make your own kit of these top 4 herbs, you could combine barberry, chaparral, and echinacea, and you would have a real broad spectrum antibacterial blend that could be applied. And I guess this kind of segues into, I wanted to touch a little bit about Lyme awareness, because I've worked with Lyme disease clinically and done a fair amount of research on it, and it's challenging to work with. And so I think if we can prevent, the more we can prevent people from being transmitted with Lyme, the better. And so one of the best things that you can do this season is to just build up your immune system. So you're more likely to get bitten if you have a weakened immune system. And one of the ways you can do that is by taking echinacea daily. And then if you get bit by a tick, you can take a higher dosage of that. You would want to find ideally a tincture that was a 1-to-1 herb to menstruum ratio, which is the strongest you can have. And then take 5 to 8 mils a day at the onset. And so that's good for prevention and at onset. And then there's been some research that if you consume about a half clove of garlic per day for up to 8 weeks, that you yourself will actually repel ticks. And it's hard even for me to ingest raw garlic, but if you mix it, if you freshly mince it and then you mix it with some oil or butter, nut butter or hummus or anything like that to kind of get it down, then that will help. So garlic and echinacea are good for prevention. Um, Echinacea at higher dosages is good for onset. And then this slide here pictures how to properly remove a tick. You want to try to keep it alive so that you can submit it to the Department of Health and Human Services, and they will identify the tick at no cost and let you know if it was infected with Lyme. And that would be really helpful to know if you're going to see your primary care doctor about the bite later on. But after you've removed the tick, you can apply either a blend of lavender and tea tree essential oil because you're combining an antiseptic with an antimicrobial, or you can apply an echinacea tincture, just put it right on where the bite was. Don't do that while the tick is still attached because you're aggravating the tick and it may make things worse. And just know that the black-legged tick is the carrier of Lyme. It's mostly with the adult females, and they're a little bit easier to identify because they have kind of that redder exoskeleton. And the spring and the fall, when the temperatures are above 45 degrees, is when they're more prevalent. I don't have a great recommendation for an herbal spray that you can make on your own that's been effective because it seems like most of them help, but they don't last for very long, and you have to constantly reapply. But there are a few, I put up a couple products there. Permethrin is a synthetically derived compound from chrysanthemum, which some people may not want to take that route because it's not really natural, but you do apply it to your clothing and not directly to your skin, and it's much less absorbed than DEET is. So that is an option. And then Stephen Buhner he's an herbalist that has published some books about Lyme disease and pretty well known, and he has formulated that spray there called Lyme Armor. And I haven't tested it, so I can't vouch for it, and it is kind of costly. For the size of the bottle, but that is an example. And if anyone knows of a good formula that they've had success with, please share because I do get asked that a lot, and I haven't quite figured out my answer. And I am saying this all because Lyme disease is supposed to increase fivefold in Michigan this year, and it's increasing all over. But I think it's good that we talk about it and are prepared. And these slides are things that people can look at on their own time. The image on the right is about the kit that you can submit to the Department of Health and Human Services. Just doing proper tick checks and other kind of common sense things that you can do for preventative measures. This is a copy of one of the rough drafts of my research on Lyme. I wrote a case report recently on a client that had chronic Lyme and our progress together, and within a year he's now symptom free, but had lived with chronic Lyme for 5 to 6 years before he became my client. And so I am just putting this on here so I remember to mention that I do work with Lyme, and that if someone has been infected and they're working with a primary care and want some complementary options for what to do in terms of nutrition and how herbalism can help and other complementary therapies, then I'm at least a resource for that. Feel free to reach out if that helps you or someone you know with Lyme. And we're nearing the end here. I just wanted to put this slide in because this was a document that was provided by Herbalists Without Borders, and it was kind of a recommended inventory of products and herbs that you could put together for your own home herb first aid kit. And it utilizes a lot of plants that grow in our region, like plantain, um, monarda, which is bee balm, eyebright. What else is in here? Chickweed or jewelweed. So I think that this could be a future workshop in itself, is instead of focusing on the wilderness herbal first aid more geared towards survival, we could do a home herb first aid if people were interested in hearing about that, and maybe getting into, at least when I teach these workshops in person, doing some hands-on medicine making. So when I taught this workshop in person, we got to, or I at least got to demonstrate making tinctures, but I'll just go through these slides briefly because with the four herbs that I highlighted today, I think the best mode to travel with them in the wilderness would be having them on hand already in tincture form, because tinctures are preserved nearly indefinitely if you take care of them. Um, and you can take an effective therapeutic dose, you'll have it on hand. Whereas teas and powders, because the herbs are exposed to so much surface area, they tend to break down quickly. You'd have to have access to clean water in most cases to take them internally or even make proper poultices. And so it just seems like if you had to choose, in most cases, tinctures are the way to go if you're doing this in a more minimalist approach. Um, so tinctures are typically made as fresh plant tinctures or a dry plant tincture. So if you're harvesting right in the field and you can transport the herb, the fresh herb, back to your home and make the tincture, a fresh herb would be really great way to do that. And you want to do a 1-to-2 ratio of herb to alcohol, um, because you have water preserved in the livelihood of that herb still. So that's going to offer some of the dilution of the alcohol. Um, and I think you get a really vital, fresh tincture that way. I think if you can do fresh tinctures, I would do that as much as you can. Sometimes that's not practical, or if you want to tincture something that you can't find in your region, you could do a dry plant tincture, and in that case, you would do a 1-to-5 ratio. And then I use Everclear, or that, at least that percentage of alcohol. And then I dilute it down with distilled water to that range of alcohol. So, and that's just because you can always dilute something that strong down, but you can't make a diluted, like a vodka, stronger. So that's how I do it. There's various ways of doing tinctures, but and then if you're tincturing something like chaparral, I think because it's on the spectrum of toxicity, it's higher in your drop dosing, you would want to do a stronger dilution, doing a 1-to-10 herb to menstruum. And then I haven't done this yet. I plan to soon, but I'm gonna experiment with percolation tincturing. And you can kind of make your own percolator with some very minimalist materials that are very low cost. And there's some research coming out on whether that percolating may produce a higher quality tincture. And the benefit to that is that it's ready in 24 hours instead of 2 weeks with the other versions of the tincture. So once you've made your percolator, you can do that, and it might be easier and less cleanup even. This is just something to consider. Is, when I was taking classes and being taught how to make herbal medicine, we used Everclear, and it wasn't really um, an issue of concern. But I would assume that Everclear is made from GMO corn, and so if you want to, you could make the investment in an organic alcohol, and I would assume shipping's going to be expensive, but you could kind of do a group order with other herbalists in your area and do that and have a higher quality alcohol. This was the first tincture that I ever made back in 2014, and it just kind of pictures the basic materials that you need to get started. It's helpful to have a digital scale, a coffee grinder, preferably one that isn't your personal one, so your coffee doesn't taste like herbs and your herbs don't taste like coffee. And that's because if you're working with a dried herb, you likely want to grind it to a coarse material. Not Don't grind it down to a powder, but coarse so that you get a stronger tincture with more surface area exposed. And it helps to have beakers so you can properly measure the percentage of water and alcohol. I just use mason jars for the blend of herb and menstruum, and you would just store it in a cool, dark place. And I often use a layer of saran wrap in between the glass jar and the lid because the rubber of the glass lid or of the lid can degrade over time and affect your tincture quality. So try to put a layer of saran wrap between the lid and the jar. And then you want to check on it every day for 2 weeks and kind of swirl it around a little bit and then just place it back on the shelf. Um, and then after 2 weeks, you would strain it. I use muslin cloth. That's just natural. I think you could also use coffee filters or a coffee filter, but you'd strain it and then you would use a funnel to add that strained liquid into your tincture, and there you go. And I think one thing to mention is even if you're just making your own label with your own, just handwriting it with a piece of paper and tape, they don't have to be fancy, but it helps to label your tinctures, which is common sense, but it often gets overlooked. So the proper way to do a label would probably be to have the common name, the Latin name, the plant part that you've tinctured, what the alcohol percentage is that you used, what the ratio is, and then also the location of where you got it. So if you ordered it from a company, you could put that, or if you got it from your backyard versus a certain park or forest, it would be helpful to have that on there too, so that as you observe the quality of your own tinctures, and if you really like something, you can go back and try to find that herb again where you got it, as long as you're not over harvesting. Or if you didn't like the quality, you could play around a little bit with the alcohol percentage and things like that. But if you don't note those things, it's hard to, it doesn't give you a foundation to improve upon. And then this was a handout provided by a faculty of my grad school, Maryland University of Integrative Health, on the percolation method. And I'm not going to go through all those steps, but you have a copy through this presentation now if you wanted to do that. You can't do percolating with fresh herbs, and you can't do it with things like marshmallow. But for all the other dried herbs, it's a good approach. The picture doesn't really do it justice. You could make one that's really beautiful, like out of a cool old wine bottle and something like that. But you can make your own percolators, and that would be something to experiment with as well. Okay, so that's pretty much it for the presentation. I hope that that was interesting and perhaps helpful. And if you have any questions, you can always contact me through my website or message me below if you'd like. Thank you. Bye.